there are prices for media hosts that start at $5, depending on how often and how frequently you're podcasting. And I'm like, give up a Starbucks and you've got your monthly hosting fee, and you're going to save yourself a big headache later.
That was Dave Jackson, and this is Podcast Ninja.
Podcast Ninja.
What's going on, ninjas? I'm your host, Anthony, and this is Podcast Ninja, a show that interviews the most successful podcasters in the game. And my goal is simply to uncover the best podcasting strategies that you can apply to your show. Today's episode, we have Dave Jackson, who is the host of School of Podcasting and many, many more I'm not going to mention in the intro. You can hear that during the show, but he has helped hundreds of people launch podcasts and is one of the top podcast consultants in the game. Now, if you need help choosing a media hosting platform and you want to hear from somebody who has tried them all, Dave is going to explain exactly what to look for and, most importantly, what to avoid. It's time to get into the show. You ready to go?
I'm ready.
Cool. All right, welcome to the show, Dave. How you doing, man?
Oh, I'm doing great, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, good. I'm happy to have you on, and we're gonna break down some podcast media hosting platforms and hopefully give some people a better idea on what to look for when to choose and how to weed out some of the ones that aren't the best. And I was hoping you could kick it off. I know you have a huge rap sheet, man. You've been in the podcast space forever, so give me a couple quick punches. How'd you get into the podcast game?
I was doing a newsletter for musicians, so I was already kind of involved with marketing and how to get more gigs and how to get more music sales and things like that. And I had a friend of mine that was going to all these different conferences, and he just came back. He said, "Hey, and this tells you how long ago it was." He goes, "How you missed the MySpace boat?" And I'm like, "Yeah, don't rub it in." And he said, "I've seen the new thing." And I'm like, "What is it?" And he goes, "Podcasting." And I go, "What's a podcasting?" And I literally I Googled it, and there was like a page, maybe a page and a half. And so when I finally pieces parted together an RSS feed, there was a archaic software called Juice that had a big picture of a lemon on it. And I put my RSS feed and I saw my audio come down to my computer. I went, oh, I see. This is going to be cool. And from there, I just took the same material that I was putting out as a newsletter for musicians and turned it into a podcast and instantly started getting more feedback, because you went from being words on a page to, oh, wow, there's an actual person back there that's actually typing all this stuff up. So, and the minute my first piece of feedback came from a guy in Nuremberg, Germany, and at the time I was in this little podunk farming town called Mogador, Ohio, that nobody's ever heard of. And I just thought, wait a minute, there's a guy across the globe listening to me and he likes it. And then at that point I was like, wait a minute, it's geeky, it's creative, and I can help people. You've just scratched every itch I have, and I've just never looked back at this point.
Love it. And what that you said MySpace, so what is that, like 04 or something?
Yeah, I started, I mean, MySpace was, forever ago.
Yeah.
And I kind of had it, but I came on real late. And because I had my own website, I didn't really quite get, like, why would I want to go to MySpace? And, I had my own website. I wanted to send people to that. And so I got on that board, but I didn't really, everybody else was just going gangbusters on it. So I kind of missed that boat. And
now you have a few podcasts, right? You host several. So, I mean, we don't have to break them all down, but maybe can you give us your favorite one? Which one do you love?
Yeah, my biggest one is the School of Podcasting. That's the one that's been around since 2005. I got 1.5 million downloads on that. They're all fairly podcasting related. I have one called Ask the Podcast Coach, which is a live kind of call-in show that I do every Saturday at 10:30 Eastern Standard Time. I do one called Best Podcasting Gear at bestpodcastinggear.com, because people just kept asking me what's the best microphone, and I'm like, kind of tired. I'm not tired, but it's like I answer the same questions over and over. And plus, and we're going to talk about this, I needed something to test all these different platforms. So I just kept making a podcast for this and a podcast for that. And I have another one called Podcast Rodeo Show, which is just if you just want to hear what somebody's first impression is of your show, I basically take it, I listen to about, 3 or 4 minutes of it, and then go, okay, here's what I would do either differently, or here's what you're doing right. And then my other passions are, I've been trying to lose weight, and I do, and then I find it, and then I lose it, and then I find it. So that's called the Logical Weight Loss Podcast. And then I used to do web design. I don't do as much of that as I used to, but I have a show called Weekly Web Tools, which is about WordPress plugins and, email tools and things of that nature. So those are the biggies. I have other ones that have come and gone, but those are the ones that I put out on a fairly regular basis. But I mean, I just started one, and you can kind of tell the ones that are tests. I have one called Bernie the Cat, which is a podcast for my cat, because somebody was asking me about Whooshka, which is this brand new podcasting platform, and it's completely free. In fact, if you do the right thing, you'll make money. And that has been tried about 3 or 4 times, but I was like, all right, so my cat now has a podcast, and he gets about 60 downloads an episode, which is even more surprising.
That's almost half of podcasters. That's not too bad.
Yeah.
Well, let's break down some of the media hosting platforms. First, I want to say, I guess some people might still be confused, like what is a hosting platform in comparison to, let's say, like an iTunes or a Stitcher. Can you kind of quickly compare the two and what we're actually talking about here?
Yeah, I always go, let's use radio because we're kind of familiar with that. If we were radio, you would have a frequency. So here in Cleveland, one of our top stations is 100.7. And that frequency is a bunch of gobbledygook. If we bust it out in an oscilloscope, it's just a bunch of waves. And so you take that wavy thing, I like those technical terms, the wavy thing, and you throw it into a radio. Well, that radio is able to convert that gobbledygook into somebody talking. It's music, things that we can then consume. Well, with podcasting, you need this thing called an RSS feed. And if you were to look at it, it's a bunch of code. It's a gobbledygook, and that's okay because I don't know what a radio frequency is either. But I know if I take that RSS feed and put it into something like iTunes or Stitcher or Overcast in the same way that you have different radios, right? You have a Panasonic, you have a Sony, you have an RCA. Those all tune into the same frequency. iTunes, Stitcher, and, Overcast all tune into your RSS feed. And in the same way, when the DJ would put on a new record, that would be syndicated out through your frequency to all those radios. Well, with podcasting, you basically put on a new episode, and that gets syndicated out to all those different apps. So why you need a media host is some people like to use their web host. And they try to use it because their web host says it's unlimited bandwidth. And you go, oh, this is awesome, and unlimited storage. But the problem is that's set up to serve a website and web pages, where now you're talking about serving media files, which are, where a web page might be, I don't know, kilobytes of information. A media file is now we're talking, 50, 60 megabytes, maybe even a gig, depending on what you're doing and how you're encoding it. And when you have 1,000 people try to grab that MP3 file all at the same time, a web host just goes, it can't handle it. It's not made for that. So it's not the bandwidth that's the issue. It's the fact that all of a sudden you're really taxing that web host, and they will politely say, you either need to upgrade or leave. So what a media host is designed to do is most of the good ones have what's called a content delivery network. So you upload your file and it's there, and they will track your downloads. They'll give you an RSS feed. They'll have your stats and all sorts of other fun little bells and whistles. But they're designed to deliver media fast and accurately, and that's just not. So when you try to, you'll hear people say, "Oh, I'm a self-hoster." Well, that means I'm hosting on my website, and that's fine. You can do that. There are people out there like, I've been self-hosting for 10 years. Like, great, but then you find out that their show isn't that popular. And so I've had a few people that have gotten popular, and that's the problem. Is now you're having a mistake, and you've got to do it in front of a crowd. And I'm always like, look, it's there are prices for media hosts that start at $5, depending on how often and how frequently you're podcasting. And I'm like, give up a Starbucks and you've got your monthly hosting fee, and you're going to save yourself a big headache later.
So anyone who's self-hosting right now is okay for now until they start racking in the downloads, and then that's when they start reaching out to transfer. I guess that's more common. So if they're self-hosting now, it means they're probably not getting a ton of downloads. Is that safe to say? It
could be. Now, I've had other people that, for whatever reason, they're like, hey, man, I'm getting, 15,000 downloads an episode. I don't have a problem. And I'm like, okay, yeah, just, we'll see what happens. But it's what's sad is I've gone to Bluehost, I've gone to HostGator, I've gone to a couple of them, and I'm like, and first they'll say, oh, yeah, it's not a problem. Bring over your MP3 files. I'm like, okay, I'm going to get about, 15,000 downloads an episode. And they're like, whoa, hold on. And none of them will say, like, here's where the line is drawn. It's 9,000, it's 8,000, it's 4. They won't give you a line. They'll just say, yeah, if you start to tax the server too much, will have to, and so they won't give you a number. And they'll tell you, oh yeah, bring them over, unlimited bandwidth. You're like, no. Once they finally find out what you're going to do, and it kind of drives me crazy that they won't give me a number so I can tell people and say, look, if you're getting close to, 4,000 downloads an episode, you're right on. I can't say that. They won't give me a number. So I just tell people, avoid using your web host. It's kind of like painting with peanut butter. I mean, you can do it, but do you really want to do it? I mean, there are things called Paint that works much better.
I don't know. I like crunchy peanut butter personally. But,
There you go.
but let's, why don't you go ahead, rattle some of the options. So like, all right, no self-hosting. Let's see, what options do people have?
My criteria is, this is what I'm looking for in a media host. First of all, I want an RSS feed that's iTunes compliant. I want tech support so that if I have a problem, you'll answer my question. I don't want you to change my file. Now, this is something that might change in the future, but pretty much what I upload is what I want to download. So if I upload a file that's 128 kilobits per second stereo, because doggone it, I'm a music show, and I upload it and I download a 64 kilobits per second file mono, I'm not happy. What I upload is what I want to download, and that includes don't change my file name. Now, that used to be a bigger deal 10 years ago than it is now, but I'm still saying what I upload is what I want to download. And then the last one I always tell people is charge me for it. And the reason for that is I've seen at least 4 different companies now that will say, we're a free media hosting company. We're going to put ads against your podcast. And if you get enough downloads, not only will you be hosting for free, but we'll pay you money. And that has yet to work. Now, podcasting is more popular now than it was, probably 5-8 years ago when I think the last time I saw this idea. So it might work, but so far it hasn't because bandwidth is not free. So when you do that, it's like I say, as soon as I see somebody come and go, oh yeah, we're a free media host, I'm like, oh, we're going to try this again. This will be fun to watch. But some of the biggies, and I need to always say this in full disclosure, I work for Libsyn, but today I'm talking as Dave Jackson from the School of Podcasting.com, because I know some people are going to go, oh, of course he's going to say Libsyn is better. But so let's talk about the big 4. You have Libsyn, you have Blubrry, Spreaker I would probably say is in there, and Podbean are probably the big 4. And so should I start with either one? Do you have a preference or?
No, break it down. I mean, yeah, go ahead. Just break it down however you feel comfortable. Go ahead.
Yeah, Podbean is the cheapest. I think they're around $4 a month, depending on how you order it. And Podbean didn't used to be great. They used to use, I think it was Amazon S3 as their back end. And if there was an award for like most improved over the last 5 years, they've really done a good job. They're basically based out of China, but they've now got smart and they've hired a staff that works in America. So you'll see them at different events. And I know Sharon, from Podbean, and I know Vernon. And so they've been inventing different features for their platform. Like they have a place over there. It's almost like a dating connection kind of thing where you can put your show, even if you don't use Podbean, you can go up there and say, here's my show. And then in theory, sponsors will say, oh, I want to sponsor that show. And that is another idea that's been done by a few people. There are websites dedicated to this, to that idea. The problem is they're all missing one key ingredient, and that is advertisers. So it's a great idea. But Podbean has okay stats. What Podbean does is they have they're probably the cheapest, but you'll also see when you order the cheapest, all the really cool features that you want, they'll be asking you to upgrade. But if you want to dip your toe in the water, Podbean is a good place to start. Spreaker, the thing that sets it apart is it actually can be used for live broadcasting. So if I want to do the Friday night football game, I could actually podcast right from my phone. And that's one thing that sets Spreaker apart. They're the only company that I know of that actually has software designed for you to help create your podcast. So you don't need Audacity. You can actually just use your phone. There's actually a software called Spreaker Studio that works on Mac or PC. And you can actually tie 2 USB microphones into that software, which is pretty slick. And so if you're doing an interview show or if you have a co-host in the room with you, Spreaker is a pretty cool thing. And plus, like I say, you can record and go out live. They actually have a chat room built into it. So that's the thing that sets them apart. The difference between Spreaker and the other 3 is all the other 3 have unlimited storage. And so like me, I have almost 12 years of back catalog on Libsyn, and you could do that on Podbean and Blubrry. Spreaker, you have a limit of X amount of hours. Now, for the record, that limit is usually about 5 or 6 years worth of material, and most people don't make it that far. But if you wanted true unlimited storage, that's one fault of Spreaker. Blubrry, its difference for many years was the fact that they have a free plugin called PowerPress. It's a WordPress plugin, so you need to be running WordPress to use that plugin. And the cool thing is you can tie that to Blubrry and basically upload your media file right from within WordPress, and it will in the back end go through and publish to their back end. You actually have a little widget so you can see your latest stats. And so everything is done right from within WordPress. And for many, many years, they were the only people that could do that. Recently, really about a year ago, Libsyn came out with their own WordPress plugin. So Blubrry isn't the only company that can do that now. Libsyn also has their plugin that will do that. The one thing that sets Blubrry apart from, I believe, any other company, and I could be wrong with this, but I'm pretty sure they're the only people doing that, they have phone support. They're the only company. You have to schedule it, but if you want to talk to somebody on the phone, Blubrry will allow you to do that. Libsyn is the oldest, biggest, baddest podcast media host, and like I said, I do work for them. The reason I work for them, though, is I was a customer for 10 years, and I was like, where would I want to work that I could look at my friends in the face and say, I think this is the best place? And some of the things that set Libsyn apart is Libsyn stands for Liberated Syndication. And so with Libsyn, you can upload a single file, and that'll update your RSS feed just like it does on Spreaker and Blubrry and Podbean. And that RSS feed can go out to places like iTunes and Stitcher and all the other places that need a standard RSS feed. But Libsyn, you can also publish to things like iHeartRadio, Spotify, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Blogger, Tumblr. So you basically upload it once, and it just syndicates everywhere. And you can actually go back in and see, like I can see how many people are using my RSS feed, how many people are listening on my website, and then I can actually drill in even deeper and go into the stats of my RSS feed and see, wow, okay, 80% of people are using Apple iTunes, 3% are using Overcast, 4% are using Stitcher, so they have really detailed stats as well. Blubrry has good stats. Libsyn's are just a little more detailed. All of those have your basic download stats, but as you get into especially Libsyn and Blubrry, they give you more detail on what people are using to listen to your show.
Okay.
So those are the big four.
Yeah. I think that's a lot for people to digest. So so as far as stats, you're saying Libsyn has some of the most in-depth stats.
Yeah, because I can actually see not only will it paste to or post to Facebook, it also Spreaker does this too. Blubrry will do a truncated version of your show to YouTube, and I believe now Podbean just came out with that feature, and it's kind of fun because somebody will come out with a feature and then eventually they all kind of catch up. But with Libsyn, you can go in and see, without going to YouTube, how many times your video was played on YouTube. You can see how many times your episode was played on Facebook. You can see how many times somebody clicked on your tweet. So it's a little more detailed on like, okay, I went ahead and syndicated this out, and I can see, wow, I thought my audience, maybe my podcast is about business. I thought I'd get a lot more clicks on LinkedIn, and instead I'm getting a lot more traction on Twitter. So it's a little more detailed.
Can you talk quickly about RSS feeds? Because I hear a lot about, they own this or they own that. Like, who owns what? Can you break that down for the few companies?
I love this. Yeah, here's the thing. It's the battle of Libsyn versus Blubrry. Blubrry will tell you that you have to own your feed. And there is truth to that because there are companies. Podomatic is somewhat notorious for this. If you're using a free Podomatic account and you do a bunch of episodes, and with Podomatic, there's too many pods in this place. With Podomatic, you have limited bandwidth. So all of a sudden you start getting popular and they just shut your show off. And they're like, sorry, no more listeners this month. You've used up all your bandwidth. Well, when you go to leave, you have to upgrade to a paid account to do what's called a 301 redirect. And let's kind of keep this in layman's terms. A 301 redirect is basically a change of address. And what this does is it lets you move from one media host to another media host and not lose your subscribers. And so if you are on an account and it's not, let's take Anchor right now. A lot of people are looking at Anchor.fm. Here's another free host that's I can just tell you right now, it's not going to work. And I emailed them and I said, if I want to leave you, can you guys redirect my feed? Well, it took them 20 days to answer that email. And they kind of went, yeah, we think we can do that. And I was like, ooh, this is not good. So that's the other thing you want to look at, because there are some kind of off-brand media hosts that I remember one was free. And I said, hey, I might review your show, your service. If people want to leave you, will you redirect their feed? And they're like, no. And I emailed them back and I go, well, you realize you're holding that podcast hostage because, it's like owning the radio signal. You own their feed. And they're like, well, we're free. What do you expect? And I was like, okay, I just wanted to know up front. So you want to be able to redirect that feed. And with Blubrry, they'll say, well, you need to own your feed on your website. And all I say, and this is, put a Bible under my hand here, I owned my own feed on the School of Podcasting, and I don't know what it was or who it was, but all of a sudden I couldn't log into my website anymore. I was on HostGator at the time, and I was just having thousands of people attacking my website. I could not log in. It was time to put out my podcast, and I'm like, hey, I need to, go in and put the show notes and upload the audio, and what's the deal? And they're like, oh yeah, you're under a denial of service attack, blah, 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 blah. And they're like, hey, whatever is using up the most bandwidth on your website, move it. And I'm like, well, I can't log in. So I finally logged into my website. I go in and I look at my stats. The thing that's using up the most bandwidth is my RSS feed. So I put in a bunch of code. I did this cool redirect change of address thing, pointed it at my Libsyn feed. And the good news was I basically had been using Libsyn as kind of my backup. So in the event my RSS feed ever went kablooey, I had a backup. So I was kind of set to go, did that. My podcast was able to go out and things were fine. Now the next month, same thing happened. Couldn't log into my website, but because my RSS feed was then on Libsyn, I didn't care. My website could blow up in flames and I could still put out my episodes on Libsyn because my Libsyn feed was fine. Now, for the record, that's just my example. I know thousands probably of people that are using PowerPress and they're not having a problem at all. I know Todd Cochran, the guy behind Blubrry, I consider him a friend, and he'll tell me about all, there was one network that had, I think it was like 500 different RSS feeds on PowerPress. And I always say it's not PowerPress, it's not WordPress, it's that one feed that you get from somebody and it's some guy in his basement. He's not a very good coder. And even though WordPress is supposed to kind of, put plugins through a process, for whatever reason, it causes a conflict. Okay, so now I control my feed, but I don't control my website. That's a problem. Now, again, for most people, it's not a problem. PowerPress is a great plugin. I know Angelo, it's great, but there is that chance. And on the other hand, they used to say, well, you don't control your Libsyn feed. You can go into Libsyn without even asking tech support and put in your own 301 redirect. In fact, we actually have a tutorial on our website that you can go over and say, how do I leave Libsyn? And it's like, here it is. Put your new feed here, do this, do that, because we don't want to hold people hostage. So again, I hear that battle a lot about owning your feed and this and that. And it's kind of like saying, what's the difference between driving a car on a summer road and a car on an ice-covered road? Ice-covered roads are not bad. I drive on them all the time living in Ohio. You just have to know what you have and realize that there's a greater chance of sliding off the road. But I've driven on ice-covered snows for years, and I don't have a problem. So I always just tell people, if you're going to use a WordPress-generated feed, have a backup of your site, make sure all your plugins are up to date, and you'll probably be fine. So it's one of those things. I think people blow both ends of it kind of. They make it sound like it's got to be one or the other. And really, I think they're both fine. And this is where people go, of course he's going to say that. I've just especially now after working for Libsyn for a year, I moved all my feeds to Libsyn because I see on a daily basis people will contact me and say, hey, I've got a problem with my feed. Can you help me? And I'll go into iTunes and I'll look up their account and I'll see they're using some third party app. And I'm like, after I just saw that over and over and over, I'm like, I'm not going to take that chance.
It's funny you say that because I've never had anyone reach out to me that says they're having problems with the RSS feed that they actually, I'm like, oh, who you're hosting with? And then they would never say Libsyn when they have these issues. It's the weirdest thing. So.
Yeah. And the biggest problem of that, just real quickly, is if you're copying your show notes from another program and you're pasting it into WordPress, especially Microsoft Word will carry with it kind of extra characters that often are almost invisible, but they cause havoc with your RSS feed. So what I usually recommend to people, if you're typing your show notes in something else, paste them into something like Notepad that'll strip out all the coding, copy that kind of blank text into WordPress, and then add your links, and you'll be golden. Won't cause any problems.
Can you, I know this has been like a hot topic recently, SoundCloud. Can you quickly tap on a little bit? I know it's still up, it's still an option for people, but yeah, maybe just speak a little bit, depending on how much you want to go in depth on it, but go ahead.
Well, any company that loses, I think we're over 400 million now, at least 300 million. And this year they said we're not going to make it to December. To me, that's kind of like getting in a boat that just has lots of holes and is already sinking. They're a music platform that dabbles in podcasting. And the problem is they're so cheap. They're $15. Whether it's any of those four I mentioned, Libsyn, Blubrry, Spreaker, they all have limits on what you can upload per month. And the reason for that is, again, bandwidth isn't free. SoundCloud does not. For $15, you can pretty much upload whatever you want. Well, okay, so all these other companies, big companies like Gimlet for a while, I think they still are using SoundCloud. And I don't think SoundCloud was counting on that. So you're having somebody paying $15 and they're using thousands of dollars worth of bandwidth. And they're getting taken to the cleaners. And again, because they're kind of a music company that dabbles in podcasting, like I know all the podcasting companies that I just mentioned, they've all said, hey, iOS 11 from Apple is coming out in the fall, and we're ready for all these new tags that are coming. I haven't heard a peep from SoundCloud because they're too busy trying to keep their head above water. And I think it was this summer, it might have been last summer, they did a thing without really even announcing it to anybody that they were going to do some maintenance that took your RSS feed offline. So again, if we go back to the radio analogy, this is like saying, hey, we're going to turn off your transmitter just for a day. Well, you can't do that if you're a radio. You need that thing on all the time. And so what was supposed to be one day, which in itself is bad enough, turned into 4 days of nobody able to access your feed. So again, and it was just one of those things where we're just like, wow, these guys just have no clue what they're doing. So it's just one of those things that I've been saying this before I worked for Libsyn. This is, if you want to use them as a secondary website, if you want to put your stuff on there, that's fine. Just don't use them for your main podcast. For me, I did that. I was getting literally 10 downloads or less per episode. And so I was like, well, this isn't worth my $15. So I quit doing that.
Okay. Yeah, that's actually a good suggestion. Yeah, use like Libsyn or Blubrry, and then you could have that, spread out to your YouTube, your SoundCloud, and yeah.
The other thing that SoundCloud does, and I don't know when they changed this, but it used to be you could click play and a couple things on their player, and they do have a really cool player, but more and more you click on stuff on the player and it takes you back to SoundCloud. And I don't want a company that's out promoting them. If I'm going to send people back to anything, I'm going to send them back to my website, not your website. Let's
talk pricing a little bit. You kind of touched upon it with SoundCloud. I know I've seen you had like some sort of formula that kind of broke it down to one of the low or least expensive plans. But before you talk about pricing, can you just talk about maybe what the average person might need as far as storage space per month?
Sure. I'll let you be my example. You're a new podcaster. You're going to do, let's say, a weekly episode, and you get to pick how many minutes?
Let's say 45.
Yeah. 45 minutes. Okay. So if we take that's 45 minutes times 4 weeks. That means 180 minutes roughly. These are all roughly, by the way, 180 minutes of content a month. Well, this is where it comes into how are you going to encode your podcast? And if you're a music show or if you want something in stereo, roughly 128 kilobits per second, depending on who you talk to, is kind of FM CD quality. And you got to remember, this is going to be listened to in earbuds or in a car. It's not super duper high fidelity. But a file at 128 kilobits per second stereo is roughly a meg a minute. So if you're doing 180 minutes, you need 180 megs. So for most companies, that's going to be somewhere between $15 and $20. But what if you go, well, Dave, I'm not doing a music show. It's just, it's an interview show. Okay. Well, now you don't really need to go stereo because it's talk and you don't need, drums in the left headphone and bass drums in the right or, strings and things like that. So if you take that same file and put it out as 64 kilobits per second mono, it's the same audio quality, but there's no stereo separation, and your file is now half the size. So if you had 180 minutes, and we said before you needed 180 megs. Well, now cut that in half. You only need 90 megs of storage space per month. And so depending on where you're at, that might be, again, the same thing. If it was less than 50 megs, you could get the Libsyn $5 a month plan. You could get the Blubrry or the Podbean, I think, has a $5 a month plan. So it depends on how much you're going to be putting out a month. But it comes down to you need to know how long is your average show going to be, how often are you going to produce a show, and then what are you producing it at. And anything over 128, I have people, they'll upload a file and they're like, hey, I'm almost out of space. And I'll look and it's like, they're exporting at 256 kilobits per second, which is almost 2 megs a minute, which is just overkill. And you also have to remember, not everybody has high-speed internet, so now it's taking longer for your file to download. They might have problems streaming it. So usually anything 128 stereo, 64 mono. Some people like to go in between and they'll go 96 mono, which, again, depending on what you're listening to, I don't really hear a whole lot of difference. But I always tell people what you can do, too, is you can record. Let's say you go into Audacity, you record your voice as a WAV file. You can take that file as the source, export it at 128 stereo, take that same file, export it at 64 mono, and then just vote with your ears and say, you know what? I don't think there's a whole lot of difference. I'll go with the cheaper version and go mono.
Yeah, that's a good practice. All right, so say that's the size, that's about the average size. Are they all going to be just a few dollars apart, around that $15, $20 range? Or is Libsyn maybe a bit more expensive or Blubrry more expensive than, let's say like a Podbean?
If you go to podcastmediahosting.com, I actually have a post about this. I'm not even going to mention SoundCloud because they're so cheap it's almost free. Podbean is about 3 cents per meg. Libsyn comes in at 5 cents per meg. That's for a 400 megs per month, which gets you the advanced stats. And then Blubrry comes in for 250 megs per month at 8 cents per meg. So that's basically, the difference between those three. And again, it kind of goes back to, and you can look at, they all have their plans and they have their pricing listed there. So you can kind of compare the apples to the oranges and go, for me, it might make more sense to go to Blubrry, or might make better sense to go to Libsyn or Spreaker if you want to do live stuff, things of that nature.
Can you kind of quickly talk about the player interface? I personally just kind of copy and paste the URL from what Libsyn gives me. It never fails. Mm-hmm. But, what are your thoughts on, is anything look cooler or the plugins any better?
See, that's all subjective.
Okay. I know SoundCloud you said has a super cool interface, which I agree.
Yeah. Blubrry has a pretty cool player. Libsyn has an okay player. Spreaker has they're all kind of the same thing. They all do the same thing. I think Blubrry has the ability to play at a faster speed, and I know Libsyn does not have that. Libsyn has buttons that you can click on so people can subscribe right there on your player. With Blubrry, I think they put links under the player, but they all kind of do the same thing. And that's where you can go to each of their websites, and they have examples that you can look at. But the thing I always kind of laugh about that, because I know there are third-party plugins. There's the Smart Podcast player. There's Simple Podcast Press. There's a bunch of third-party players that you can use, and those all look great. 86% of podcasts are listened to on a mobile device, and that's usually through some sort of app. So a lot of people aren't even going to your website, and we're all really freaking out about that. So
that's a huge point. Man. Yeah, I totally forgot about that. But I know a lot of people do freak out about the plugin interface, so that's a good point. So I just want to wrap up the show at this point, and I'm curious if you have any other, advice or closing tips that kind of help people choose their podcast media host.
I stay away from free stuff. I would just say that straight up. That's just hasn't worked over the years. And in terms of, again, like what we talked about before, if you're going to be doing live streaming stuff, then Spreaker's probably your best choice. If you are looking for a lot of stats and details, then Libsyn's probably your best choice. If you're a big WordPress fan, PowerPress is a super solid plugin that will do that. It's really kind of there's not a bad choice in any of those. Let's go that route. So try them all. I guess you can't try them all, but go check them out. And if you want, what I've told people is send in a support. If it boils down to they're all the same, then really what you're going to want to do is test their support. So send an email to each support staff and see who replies the fastest. Okay. Good point. Dave, any other way someone can reach out to you if they want to find more information or they want help launching their show or things like that? How can they reach out to you? Yeah, you can find me at schoolofpodcasting.com. That's my main website, and I've got all my contact information and all my iTunes links and all that other fun-filled stuff.
Cool. All right, Dave, thanks for coming on the show, man. Really appreciate it. I'll talk to you soon, all right?
Yeah, take care. Thanks, buddy.
Thank you for listening to the 6th episode of Podcast Ninja. If you want to check out any of Dave's podcasts, or you want a more in-depth breakdown of all the platforms we sort of discussed during the show, go ahead and check out the show notes at podcastninja.net/6. Thanks again for listening, and I'll talk to you all soon. Peace.
Podcast Ninja.